So Mike Trout is among the leaders in home runs. I think he's tied for the lead in home runs in baseball. There are a lot of guys that have 6.
Well, he's got 10 hits, and 6 of them are home runs.
So, but the Angels, that is not the Angels' best player so far, who I just came to find out is a guy named Kenry Paris. He is number 2 behind Corbin Carroll in offensive WAR this year. The guy's got 5 homers. He's got like an ops of 297.
He's got an OPS of 1402.
1402, an ops plus of 297. And I've never heard of the guy.
He's got 5 stolen bases. He's hitting 400. So it's either new second baseman. He's off to an absolutely unbelievable start. He's 23 years old. He played like 51 games last year. Didn't do a thing.
I saw that.
He had like 118 last year.
So you'd be right to say it isn't going to last just as much as you look at the Angels atop the AL West and you think it isn't going to last.
No, but from what we've seen for the Angels, they don't need it to necessarily. I mean, they'd love if it had lasted the whole year. If they won that division, that'd be an unbelievable story. But even if they're Angels, if this first place thing can run through May, then you at least set yourself up to be in the wild card conversation the rest of the season, unless you really go in the tank.
You know what they are. They're this year's Pittsburgh Pirates.
And that there's always one. There's always some team. And that team could be out in the West. I mean, we're looking at the NL West over there. You've got teams you don't think are going to fall back that way in the Padres and the Giants and the Diamondbacks and the Dodgers, but there's a world where this 10-4 Giants start for them is the high point of their season.
I kind of feel the same way. I mean, it's a nice story right now with the Giants, and Wilmer Flores, who he is tied for the National League lead or the baseball lead, I should say MLB lead in home runs with 6.
They're playing the Yankees today,
and Wilmer is just killing. You know that I saw that Wilmer has just about enough games where he's going to play more games for the Giants.
He's about to overtake it. He's got a 10+ year MLB career.
It's more like 12 or something like that.
14 years.
He played 6 and 6. This might be his 13th year, and so he has currently the most game-winning walk-off hits of any player in baseball, tied with Bryce Harper since he's been playing.
Right?
So which is pretty amazing.
As we often call him with the Mets, a professional hitter.
He's a professional hitter, and he is socking the ball this year. But they asked him in an article this week in the Athletic, about the love he gets from Met fans, and he kind of wistfully goes, "I love going back there. They're so nice to me."
It's got to be wild that he hasn't been there in like 7-8 seasons,
we all
still talk about him.
Love that. I don't know that I really want him on my team.
No, but I will talk. I will wax poetically about him for sure.
So and he is as much the reason the Giants are doing so well as anything else in the NL West.
Right, and as much of the start of the season has been a dream for Wilmer Flores, I think both the Twins and the Braves are hoping to wake up from the nightmare that has been the beginning of their season. At least the Chicago White Sox are trotting out a lineup where you look at them and you go, "Oh yeah, it makes sense why they're 4-11. I didn't know any of these guys were in Major League Baseball before today." That's not the case with the Twins and the Braves. They have legit MLB rosters, and they still stink.
Yeah, still looking for Carlos Correa to show up for the Twins, and we seem to say that too much, and for a player that I've always been pretty supportive of. But we were talking before the podcast that aside from the Angels, I guess pretty much water is finding its level, and now we're after, and this is Sunday afternoon, so the games haven't yet been played for Sunday. But 14 games, 15 games, and if you're the Dodgers and the Cubs, a little bit more. So you're not quite a tenth of the way through the season, is the point here.
Right. For the most part, I'd say the big outliers were the two teams I just named in the Braves and the Twins. Those are really the only teams that I think are performing wildly out of expectations. I think if you're a Baltimore Oriole fan, you're like, uh-oh, that second half of swoon last year wasn't a second half swoon. There's something rotten on Baltimore.
I think the Orioles, and it's look, they're only 6-8 going into game on Sunday, so a win on Sunday and they're a game, and
they're not far back about the Yankees.
Such a small amount, right? So the Tigers being at 9-5 in first place, that's a nice thing that they're in first place. But it's not like, well, they're going to be a 100-win team this year.
No, but there is a world where when you are these teams, you can't let your 6-8 start turn into a 16-28 start.
Not if you're a team that is not likely to win a wild card out of your division,
right? And
you have to win the division in order to make the playoffs.
You do not want to be the Baltimore Orioles and be looking at yourself at the end of April, beginning of May, going, "It's okay. We only have 3 teams to climb over to get out of the East." You don't want to put yourself in that position to start the season, especially because the Rays look like they're going to be the annoying type of bad team where they're pesky bad. Like they're not a good baseball. They're not going to be a playoff team, but they're not going to just roll over for you and die like you can kind of count count on out of some teams.
I think that's true, and I think the AL East is a good example of a team where they're going to beat the hell out of each other all season long. So somebody who might have won 96 games is probably more likely going to win 90 games.
That's why the Atlanta Braves are in such a bad position, because you have to, not only do you have to deal with the fact the Mets and the Phillies are both good baseball teams, the Marlins and the Nationals aren't so bad that you just get a bunch of free wins against them. You're going to lose games to them, and if you stumble a little bit too much against either one of those teams with the way the start that you've now had, you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
So I'm watching the Marlins play the Mets earlier in the week. The new manager of the Marlins, Clayton McCullough, made some very questionable calls. It was really interesting to see a guy who's a first-time manager, how he was doing things.
He's actually just doing Twitch manages baseball. He just goes to Twitch chat and sees whatever they suggest for a given play.
I mean, it's a rare thing where everybody, me watching the game and the guys calling the game are going, what is he doing?
He just sees type 1 to bring in the infield, and everybody starts spamming it.
Oh, we're going to play very aggressive. No, that's not a good baseball play. Everybody's agreeing. So it's kind of interesting. He came from the Dodger organization, so because he's got pedigree, he knows how to manage really good players, not really.
You know what?
Not
and the
great
Marlins
players.
are 7-7, and when you look at the lineup they're trotting out there,
That's
some
a
of
win.
the time, that's a win. And you know what? That one center fielder we've seen now made like 2 or 3 unbelievable plays out there against the Mets in that series.
So and like you said about the Braves, they're 5 games behind the going into Sunday, the Mets and the Phillies at this point. Yeah, they could be 15 games out, and I still wouldn't trust the Braves not to come back.
The other team I actually kind of want to shout out here as a team that, watching them, they look like the real deal, is the Chicago Cubs.
I thought so before the season.
Right. And now, having watched them play, we both picked them to win the division. We both, I think we both picked them to win the NL Central, but neither one of us were sure were they up in the class with the rest of the NL expected playoff teams. Because you really look at the NL, and people would kind of argue you had 4 to 5 spots kind of locked in before the season. And would the Cubs just be there because somebody has to win the Central? No, that looks like a legit team you're going to have to deal with in the postseason right now.
And there are 2 words in my mind that change the mojo for the Cubs, and that's Kyle Tucker. Mm-hmm. He's number 1 in WAR in the major leagues. I'm playing for a contract.
But he's given them an alpha dog in that line, in a lineup that desperately needed one. When all of the other NL teams have a big dog in their lineup somewhere. If the Braves are healthy, you've got Ronald Acuna Jr. With the Mets,
he comes back.
When he comes back. With the Mets, you've got Soto and Lindor. Dodgers have Ohtani, Betts, and Freeman. The Padres have Tatis and Machado. The Cubs didn't have that guy before they got Kyle Tucker. Now they got that guy. And Philly's got Harper and Schwarber.
Aside from your slap at Pete Alonso there, I wanted to say that Ian Happ.
He's hitting that way.
Yeah, Ian Happ is a very good baseball player, and I don't give him enough credit for being as good a player as he is.
Right, but he's a very, very good player, but I don't think anybody saw him in the
He was the number 1,
class.
and now he's not.
Now he's not, and that's why they've now made that jump up into being a team that you're going to have to deal with them come this postseason. As long as those pitchers stay healthy, Steele and Imanaga are going to be a tough out in the playoffs.
Well, no, you just said the word, because Steele has an elbow problem, and they're looking at it. He's now going for a second opinion after the MRI. When a guy goes for a second opinion, that means he didn't like the approach of the first opinion.
I knew we went to see the elbow, but I didn't hear anything after we went to see the first one, so I thought it was okay. But
we're going to let him rest because he had the same injury last year, and they shut him down for 3 weeks, and then he came back. But when it happens again, and it happens at this point in the season after spring training, boy.
Which makes me think the recommendation was either get the Tommy John surgery now or wait until later and get it then.
I think that is one way or the other you're getting it. It just depends on how long you can last.
Right, that might have been the conversation.
So the Brewers are doing it with mirrors because that they're 8-7 is, and that's basically on the back of Jose Quintana going out there and throwing a gem in his first start for Milwaukee. The Reds and the Pirates and the Cardinals. Well, the Pirates are in last place and a little bit puzzling team, but the Cardinals kind of had a nice week or week
they had
and
a nice
half.
Opening week.
Yeah, now they're just kind of sinking.
And
a little
now
bit.
they're becoming what we thought they were.
The Padres in the West, and my friend Tom and I were talking today. He's become a big Pods fan, and he mentioned to me that not only are they in first place because there's a lot of pride out there in San Diego for being ahead of the Dodgers and the Giants, that the Padres have sold out every home game for the season. And boy, Uncle Stevie here in New York for the Mets would go, but wait a
Well,
second.
there's a
Why
couple-
can't we do that?
Well, because it's 70 degrees there instead of 35 and raining.
It's
here in New York.
69. You're wrong, but yes, that's the weather's better, which has been miserable here.
Right,
in
that's
New York
probably
City.
as big a reason why we're not selling out games here in New York, is it's been awful this past week.
But they have, they've created this thing in San Diego. When you think about it, in San Diego, by the way, they don't have another professional sports franchise.
that probably helps a lot too.
Right, so it's only the baseball team. They lost the Chargers, and that really hurt the people down there a few years ago, and they haven't had the Clippers in 25 years or more. So I think the Padres have done a great job of building a very, fanatical group of people that support the team, and they're good.
They're going to be good.
They're not talking about trading Dylan Cease right now.
No.
So, I think that's a big difference, in that, they're going to keep the players instead of move them. We were talking about maybe moving a guy like Cease at the All-Star break. I'm not seeing that happen
I don't
right
think that's
now.
happening.
I think they got A.J. Preller kind of did it with mirrors again, and it's working out right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, besides Steele on the list, there's a lot of guys on the IL, that are kind of coming up lame. Wyatt Langford of the Rangers, who are in first place in their division.
Benintendi makes one of his yearly trips to the IL.
Pablo Lopez, which it's a hamstring strain, which is a heck of a lot better than any kind of an arm injury for a pitcher. But Minnesota can't afford. They're not hitting that much. They can't afford to lose a pair like
Right. I mean,
like
San Diego
Lopez.
also lost Cronenworth. He has a right rib fracture. That's the kind of thing that can linger and bother a guy a whole season.
Cronenworth is an important player for them.
Keep that. Baltimore already lost Eflin he's on the 15-day IL with a right lat strain, and that's a team that needs good news, not bad news right now.
Well, they haven't gotten good news from Adley Rutschman, who looks now a lot like the player. I was questioning him before the season.
Right, he looks like
he looks like the player we thought he was supposed to be.
But for a team that had so many young and upcoming pitchers, what happened to them? Like, I thought they had a bunch of really good young arms.
One of them's pitching in Arizona now.
Right.
That would be Corbin Burns. So, and John Means. Remember, I used to love John Means.
He's a persona non
I
grata.
don't even know
at
where
this
he
point.
is. He's not on the Orioles anymore. I think he's on a different team. And so the league leaders are guys. You talk about leading in WAR besides Corbin Carroll. Aaron Judge got 20 RBIs. He's had a great start to the season. But he's not probably the most important Yankee, I think, right now, hitting-wise. It's Ben Rice, because I don't think you expected to get, well, you hope you'd get a lot from Ben Rice, and not having Stanton in the lineup, the Yankees are still scoring enough runs with a bunch of guys behind Aaron Judge that, like, well, who else do they have besides Jazz Chisholm? And Goldschmidt's had a decent start for them, I think. But in general, Ben Rice, I think, is the big surprise there.
And they need surprises out of that lineup, because they're 8-6 right now, and that's with Aaron Judge putting up 1.1 WAR in his first 15 games. He's not going to do that. He's not going to put he could have another 10 WAR season, but you can't count on this from him every single year if you're the Yankees, because it's got the collective weight of the world on Atlas's shoulders here is eventually going to lead to a breakdown, and then what are you left with?
I think Max Fried has shown, he hasn't been perfect for them, but he's been good. He's got a couple of wins for the Yankees.
They got to hope he's good, because they're stuck with him for a long time.
And one of the great stats I saw this week, and we're going to talk about starting pitching in a little bit for the Mets this time, is that there's only been one complete game this year. It's a shutout by Nate Eovaldi in the entire major leagues. And you think about, we're going to go back in time and look at starting pitchers who might have had 3 complete games by now already, much less a shutout or two.
Everybody would have had 3 complete games.
So I don't know. I don't know what's happening out there. There's a new term out in baseball called 5 and dive. Right, you basically pitch 5 innings and then you're done. Pitching now at this time of year, that can happen a little bit more than you'd expect in midseason.
Right. The difference is that we don't see many guys. We don't see a lot of 7-inning starts out of guys anymore.
You don't see many 6-inning starts.
Right. 6-inning starts are a good start, and that's what good starters do. But rarely do you see guys pitching into the 7th, because now is it not only do you have to get to the 7th, you have to not have a large number of pitches, because teams are just so averse to the idea of letting a guy pitch to the 3rd time through a lineup. So just to get to the 7th inning, you basically have to be incredibly efficient the first 2 times through the lineup.
And all the veteran pitchers that watch baseball today shake their heads at this. Like let the pitcher figure out his way to get the guys out the 3rd time. We had to do it. We figured it out, and we did what we could, and most of the times the managers are not allowing that to happen.
Right. It's not like the pitchers are asking to come out of these games. I'm sure if you asked most of them, they would want to stay in.
I'll stay in there until I can't pitch no no more.
Exactly.
So, yeah, and so the pitching has, been very good early in the season, as it's often the case. And I think that, whether these guys can sustain it, the guys at Schwellenbach, who's had a great start to the year for the Atlanta Braves, and Hunter Green, who's been amazing for the Reds.
Right. It's interesting that he's not quite throwing as hard as he used to, but now he has control. And he doesn't need to throw 102 on every pitch, because guess what? When you throw 99 on the black each time, that's just as unhittable.
Luzardo, we saw pitch a great game for the Phillies against the Dodgers a couple of weeks ago, and so there are already 5 pitchers that have won WAR for the season after like 3 starts.
Well,
that's really impressive to me.
But I also think, because remember, WAR is calculated against the replacement level starting pitchers. So when you look at it, I'm sure the nobodies that are getting trotted out right now, the sacrificial lambs, because teams need a guy to pitch on a 6th day, those guys are getting killed right now. And so the difference between your replacement level pitcher and a top line pitcher is so stark that I think that's why you're seeing such crazy WAR totals for some of these starters already.
Well, and you're right. It's also measured against your peers. So if nobody is going 5 innings,
you have a couple. And I think it's like you look at some of these teams. Look, you as a pitcher, you've got 3 starts. If you had the right combinations of teams for you to start against in the beginning of the year, you could just have way better starts purely based off of that. If your first 2 starts were against the Rockies and the White Sox, you're going to look way different than if your first starts were against the Dodgers and the Phillies.
Right, and I think you'll just rate better.
Right, and so you obviously these WAR totals, and I think WAR totals for pitchers are probably a little bit more opponent dependent than hitters.
I mean, only a limited amount of appearances, obviously, as well. So yeah, we're 15, 16 games in the season maybe, and so what happens is you can't use anything as a barometer other than you hopefully didn't get off to a terrible start, and obviously if you get off to a great start and you got a lot of wins, you hope to bank those wins when you need them later on in the season.
Right, and that's that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the Twins and the Braves, is that when you have these slow starts like the Mets did last year, you have to play at such an unbelievable pace the rest of the way that it's amazing while it's happening, but even as a Met fan watching that last season, we always kept having this thought of like, it can't keep going like this the whole time.
They're better than this.
Right. They're not. No. It was the opposite. We knew they weren't that good.
Oh, when they started playing well.
When they started playing well, when they were playing well, and they were playing for that, like that 700 winning percentage for the last bunch of the season. You kind of knew in the back of your head, it's like, okay, the carriage has to turn back to a pumpkin at some point. Teams just don't magically do this.
They were 11-22, and I don't want to go back there and try to do that again.
Right. You don't want to do that if you're the Braves or the Twins.
So that's the main thing is that you basically at the end of May, last year the Mets were 11, and you almost were ready to count them out, but you didn't. So that means you got to go into June before you can really proclaim your team dead, unless they're just a bad team to start with, like the Rockies,
right,
or
where there's no expectation they're going
to
suddenly turn it around.
Exactly. So the best teams in baseball. We haven't mentioned the Dodgers very much in this because they're just kind of bumping along at this point, and it's
Blake Snell goes steps away for a little bit to get looked at. Doesn't matter. They've still got so many arms.
Yamamoto's been very good. Sasaki's been good.
Though we did have a funny game last night where they got whipped by the Cubs on Saturday night. So they had Miguel Rojas come into pitch.
I saw that,
and he started imitating all of the Dodgers starters. So he threw a pitch like Yamamoto. He threw a pitch like Kershaw. He was doing
That's what you do when you lose 16-0.
Right. I think his Yamamoto impression was spot on.
I didn't see that.
He nailed the impression of him.
It reminds me of
impressive.
Djokovic imitating the tennis players when he was a young player. That was a very funny thing. So anyway, so let's jump into this topic that I kind of wrote a post. I wrote a post for the MLB report last year that is now defunct, a website, so you can't find this post anymore online. And I refined the post thinking that I came up with the 5 greatest starting pitchers in Mets history. But then you and I talked about it, and I thought, there's a lot of other teams where you could easily come up with 5 great starting pitchers, and I don't know who they are necessarily all on the top of my head anymore than anybody would.
Having the discussion of naming them is an interesting thing, because for most teams, if you're including all of history, it's kind of easy at the top of the list for a lot of teams. Let's be honest, because if you're a Met fan, 2 spots are guaranteed, and you can kind of argue a third one is too.
I think the Mets might be the easiest team to do, because they've only been around for 60-something years, as opposed to, like, the Athletics, when you got to think about Eddie Plank and stuff, like guys when they pitched a million innings.
Now you're going to have to compare Eddie Plank to Tim Hudson.
Yeah, right. Boy, that's an interesting comparison.
Right. but for the Mets, they don't really have that. With the Mets, they have 2 guys that stand out so far and away above the rest historically in terms of Tom Seaver and Dwight Gooden.
I would put Seaver a cut above.
And you put a cut above Gooden because Seaver did it for longer and more consistently.
And as a Hall of Famer.
But those guys were so clearly better than the rest. The only guy that even kind of approaches them in talent level and production on the field in any given season is Jacob deGrom.
Well, and DeGrom won 2 Cy Youngs and almost
probably
won a third. So I think for that reason, I wouldn't put Gooden that much further ahead of DeGrom, other than he didn't have any postseason success to speak of.
Realistically, whereas Gooden at least got a World Series.
He was on a World Series winner, yes.
Right, but those 3 guys, you can really lock them in because nobody else is going to approach them. You could say, well, R.A. Dickey won a Cy Young for the Mets, but that was 1 season. I don't think anybody's going to be putting, Met fans are going to be putting R.A. Dickey in their pantheon of meaningful Met pitchers.
But that was a great season.
Even though we had an unbelievable...
That was an amazing season.
It is interesting because are you rating them about their core contribution to the Mets?
So my criteria was you have to play 5 years for the team in order to be in that.
And that already makes it really hard.
It makes it good because it eliminates Johan Santana. Mm-hmm. It takes away Pedro Martinez for the Mets. Not that Pedro was great for the Mets. He was good for the Mets.
And we would also quantify this as having to have your success with that team. Otherwise, we'd have to say, well, isn't Nolan Ryan one of the best pitchers to ever play for the Mets?
No, he didn't do it with the Mets.
Right, exactly. So we have to talk about people that played for 5 years. Now, it's also going to make it hard because guys don't stick around with teams as long as they used to, and they don't rack up stats like they used to. So guys like Matt Harvey and DeGrom aren't going to get the chance to rack up the bunch of extra statistics at the end of their career when they're not that good that you kind of need.
We thought Harvey was going to be that. I have to say, I thought Harvey was going to be that guy. He was going to be around for 10 years. He was going to be like an old school Met pitcher who just pitched. But it's so hard to stay healthy now, and I think that's the big difference. Is we're not going to have these guys that we're going to talk about today. I don't know if they're ever going to be taken out of the top 5.
The thing I always will feel bad about for Harvey is that unlike DeGrom, where people will always point to the health as the reason he wasn't ultimately a Hall of Fame pitcher, Harvey, there's always going to be the question of, well, if he had put the effort in, would he have had the health problems?
I don't know if I agree with that at all.
I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying people look at it that way because he so didn't take care of himself. And he did so many wacky...
Take care of himself. Because he was a guy who went out with supermodels and had this sort of public life in a way that, DeGrom didn't.
Let's be honest. It wasn't just going out with supermodels here. We all know that he was as much a fan of the nose candy as Keith Hernandez was.
I don't know about that myself.
He's talked about that.
That's fine, but I also didn't get the feeling the guy wasn't a guy who didn't work hard, and he did get injured. The thoracic outlet thing, that was devastating to his career. He was never the same.
No, he was never the same after that. But there was a lot of other things where there were times where being Matt Harvey, the celebrity, seemed more important to him than being Matt Harvey, the pitcher.
I will grant you that there's truth in that.
Right.
There's truth in those words.
You always have to wonder, imagine if Matt Harvey had DeGrom's crazy
those days
ethic.
as Met fans when Harvey Day was like Wednesday, was Harvey Day.
It was great.
He would pitch on Wednesdays, and he was really good.
He didn't put up the career statistics to get,
not even close.
And then this is where I struggled as a Met fan because a lot of the guys that did have the career statistics to get there, I'm going to say Al Leiter is an all-time Met pitcher.
I would say he's one of them.
He's up there.
He's not my top 5.
Right, but my top, when you go to the top 5, it's a lot of guys I never watched play.
Well, and then that is you talked about that before going, yeah. So, when I picked my top 5, the fourth one was pretty easy, even though it wasn't as easy as the top 3, for me, and that was Jerry Koosman, who has a legit case for the Hall of Fame. It isn't a Hall of Famer and probably never will be, but was a great pitcher for a lot of years. Performed at the most important points in Met history in the 1969 World Series specifically, where he won the ultimate game and won 2 games in that World Series. Strikeouts, taking the ball all the time, playing a lot of years for the Mets. To me, he's clearly the next guy because I couldn't come up with another guy to take it over him.
He's a guy I think that I could say maybe Met Hall of Fame. I think trying to make the suggestion that Jerry Koosman is a actual Hall of Famer might be a step too far.
Well, I don't say he's an actual. I'm saying he has a legit case for the Hall of Fame. I didn't say he
I
should
think
be
he's
in
got
it.
a legit case for the Hall of Very Good.
Yeah, well, and that's where he is.
Right. Because I'm sorry, a guy that has 140 career wins and is also his franchise's career leader in losses is not typically a guy that makes the Hall of Fame.
So to try to follow this, so when I did some research on Koosman, it's like okay, so he's got a bunch of years with the Mets. I think 12 years for the Mets, and he won 140 games, which is third in team history, and that's great. What I didn't realize is he lost more games, and now does it really matter, than any pitcher in Mets history. As a matter of fact, he is number 1, Seaver is number 2, and Gooden is number 3 in guys who lost the most games in Mets history. So here we are with 3 of the top, I'm going to say these are 4 of the top 5 guys, and they all amongst the guys who lost the most for the Mets.
And interestingly, he did win, 200 games in his career, though his best pitching season, ironically, was not with the Mets. It was actually with the Twins. He put up a 7-WAR season with the Twins in 1979.
And that's mainly because when Koosman was pitching great, that that was the year the pitcher, when he started his career, it was 1967, I think, and then in 68 was the year of the pitcher. And so he's around when pitching was at a premium, and then you get the new teams in the league in 69. And, basically, if you were not an experienced hitter, Jerry Koosman owned you, because he was a guy who knew how to get you out.
Right, and then the problem is once you get past Koosman, the pickings get even slimmer then.
Right, and like you said, when I said, well, you saw Ron Darling. No, you didn't see Darling pitch.
I never saw Darling.
You didn't see Sid Fernandez pitch.
Nope.
You didn't see David Cone pitch.
I saw Cone pitch in the major leagues, but not for the Mets, and barely because he was pitching when I was a literal child.
And you saw Al Leiter pitch. So
Leiter, I remember the best because he was still pitching for the Mets into the late 90s. So
into 2000, yeah.
Into the 2000s. So because I will never forget that game he started for the Mets against Cincinnati in game 163.
The ultimate game for the Mets to make the playoffs. And so he had 7 years. Cone had 7 years. But the guy who had 7 years I would probably favor was a guy that you probably don't know much about, and that's John Matlack. And a great left-handed pitcher who ended up going to Texas after he left New York. But for the years he was with the Mets, and he was the pitching star of the 73 team that went to the World Series and lost in 7 games.
And so
Oakland.
He would probably be a lot more remembered if they had ended up winning that World Series in 73. He would be a lot more known and a lot more famous for that. Famous then.
And I wanted to shout out to Ron Darling because being behind Dwight Gooden, well, you're always going to be kind of forgotten a little bit because Dwight was the pitcher on the 86-85 Mets. And Darling was there all the time as the solid number 2. Had 99 wins as a Met pitcher. Man, why didn't he get that one last win? I mean, that 100 wins would have been so much cooler. 70 losses, so no, that at least he's not one of the top losing pitchers in Met history for a change to be there. And just a really good fielder, a guy who could, run the bases. At a time where you can't imagine them doing this today, he was a guy who would be put in by Davey Johnson as a pinch runner a lot. Like, what if he pulls his hamstring or something running? I didn't care about that kind of stuff, So I like the athletic nature of what Darling brought to the game, and obviously a Yale guy, so a smart pitcher. But I would have slide him behind Matlack as much because of the postseason success that Matlack had in 73, although Darling was good in 86.
And Matlack has some hardware. He was Rookie of the Year. That also counts a lot. Bringing hardware in for a team that's actually had a fair number of Rookies of the Years.
Mets pitching Rookies of the Year as well.
I've had a bunch of those. So I think that you kind of look at that, and it's just interesting because when I think about some of the other teams, we're going to run into the same things we ran into here. There's almost every team's going to have 1 or 2 guys at the top of their list for the most part, except for maybe the most recent expansion teams that are basically untouchable. When you go to the Orioles, Jim Palmer is going to be on your best Oriole pitcher.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt, every single time.
But you'd have a hard time coming up with 5 guys, much less the top 5 guys.
Once you start getting past 3 and 4 into 4 and 5, that's when you have to start really having to know your pitchers.
As I sit here and think right now, going, so if I had to think about, or just randomly, Orioles pitchers, there are really good pitchers on the team, but probably guys that you haven't heard of. Dennis Martinez pitched a lot of years for Baltimore, the El Presidente.
Well, I'm thinking about
wonderful pitcher.
I'm thinking about Kansas City. I'm like, okay, they got Brett Saberhagen and
Brett
Saberhagen and
right. You have to go to guys
Zach
like
Greinke.
Dennis Leonard,
Right.
Zach Greinke. So we'll do that as we periodically. I don't think we're going to necessarily do this every week,
but it'll be a fun thing for us to stop
in on. We're going to visit the top 5 starting pitchers for every team in Major League Baseball. Maybe your team's next.